Welcome to my studio. I'm Debbie Tribble of Dreamweaver Quilting. Thanks for joining me for another Tiny Tip Tuesday. Today we're going to talk about marking tools. It would be really nice to tell you there's one best marking tool, but that's just not so. There are many marking tools on the market because there are many different applications. It's up to you to test the marker you choose. You want to test the marker for visibility and ease of removal. If you are piecing or making a garment, a mark could be inside a seam allowance. But if you're working on the surface of a quilt, it's very important that any marks that have been made can be removed when the stitching is completed. I would suggest that you always test the marker that you're going to use on a sample piece made of the same goods that you are going to make your final product in. Some things that you need to consider are the color of the fabric, the fiber content of the fabric being used, as well as if any heat will be used during the construction process. Heat can sometimes set markings, making them impossible to remove. The first marking tool I want to talk to you about is a pounce pad. Pounce pads are used with stencils. There is a material in here, this one is made by Miracle Chalk, and you pounce the pad inside the container which loads it, and then you have the pounce pad and you just move it over the top of the stencil, and as you're doing that, these little particles of chalk fall down into the cut holes, leaving you discernible markings so that you can now stitch on that. This product states that it is removable with a couple shots of steam. It's important for you to test the product to make sure it's the correct product for your application. The next product I want to talk to you about is transfer paper. This brand is Sorel. It's a wax-free transfer paper. The way this works, there's a right side and a wrong side. The marking portion is going to come closest to the roll. You'll see when you take it off. You want to have your fabric on the bottom, then the transfer paper, and then a pattern that you would like to trace. And you can then use a stylus or a tracing wheel, depending on the thickness of the pattern, and you will get an image on your fabric. Chalk and chalk wheels come from the garment industry and can easily be used in the quilting world. To use, you simply hold the chalk and mark, or the chalk wheel, and pull it along the fabric. I would caution you though that because they are used in garments, several of them come with colored chalk, and the colored chalk dyes may not easily remove from fabric. So again, always test the product that you're working with to make sure it's proper for the application. Traditional marking tools, both graphite and water soluble, are the next thing we're going to talk about. You always want to work with a nice sharp point on your marking tool. I have a handy little pencil sharpener. This one has two holes, which happens to fit the smaller and the larger marking tools. Make sure that you read the documentation so that you understand what the manufacturer recommends for use and for removal. And keep your directions after you've opened your package, because if you're like me, you won't remember next week. As you're using these things, I want you to remember it is your responsibility to test these on a sample to make sure that this is the correct product for your application. Now I'd like to talk to you about chemical markers. There are several options and they come with varying directions for removal. I have a product by Clover that is a white marking pen, makes a fine line as a ballpoint end. So as I mark on the fabric, I don't really see it, but I know it's happened. And as a few minutes pass, the white, kind of like a white powder, will kind of come up to the top. I like that one. Okay, works pretty good. Another one is a blue marker. I really like the blue markers. They get a bad rap sometime, but they're a chemical, so they must be removed with water. There's also a purple marker. Now the purple markers are air soluble, so if you live in a climate that's very humid, you have to take that into consideration. Perhaps even the time of year would make a difference for you. You wouldn't want the marks to disappear before you were ready for them to. The chemical markers, blue and purple, you don't want to use any heat prior to removal. And to remove these, because they are a chemical, I would suggest that you get a tub of cold water and put the item in the cold water, soak it, drain it, rinse it, soak, repeat. Use no soap during this soaking process. This allows the chemical that's sitting on top, as well as the chemical that has been pushed down into the batting fibers and migrated to those areas, to be released and washed away. After that, you should be fine. This is a vest that I made, in 1995. And on my domestic machine, I quilted all these quilting lines, but I quilted them after I marked the entire vest front, both pieces, with the blue marker. When I was finished quilting the stitches, I finished constructing. I did not put any heat on the garment, and then when I was finished, I soaked it as I described above. As you can see, 25 years later, there is still no migration of the marker to the top because it was all rinsed away. So you really need to follow the manufacturer's instructions on these things. So let's talk now about Frixion markers. Frixion markers were made for the office community. They were really not made as a quilting tool, but you'll find them in many quilting shops. So we're going to discuss them. They are a chemical. The pros are that when you work with it, it's a nice fine line, and so if you're trying to mark a seam line or such, you get a really nice fine line. It also, when the heat of an iron touches it, it will remove the marks. The cons are, when the mark is removed, it sometimes leaves the ghost of the image. In other words, it doesn't all go away. And when the garment or quilt is exposed to extreme cold, the marks will return. Something to consider when you are marking with this tool. So I would like to say in closing that I want you to always test the product you have chosen to make sure it's the correct tool for your application. I hope the information shared with you today will help guide you to a proper marking tool for your application. Thanks for joining me for another Tiny Tip Tuesday. I hope to see you again next week.